Hello, everyone. This is the second recording of Aristotle, a class on the Nicomachean ethics. Today, I want to talk about Book 1, and I want to discuss both the positive proposal that Aristotle formulates and defends and the method that he employs, or at least some dimensions of his method. Now, what is the positive proposal? We already saw that Aristotle starts with the question, what is the good? And then he interprets that question as, in fact, asking, what is the final good or the final end, assuming that goods and ends can be identified. And then the view is that the final end of human action is eudaimonia, happiness, a well lived human life, and in other formulations, living well, doing well. So all of those formulations are almost equivalent, and we will talk more later on in the semester about, what does Aristotle mean when he speaks about happiness, eudaimonia. For now, I just sort of want to note that Book 1 does not yet give us a substantive account of what it would look like for someone to lead a happy life. Aristotle is not telling us, well, that person would engage in such and such activities or such and such activities. He is only creating that framework in which he can then, in later books, develop that kind of picture. And this framework says, well, when we ask in ethics what the good is, then we are really asking what is the final good. And that is a question about human agency. And that is a question about what ultimately motivates people. And this final end, according to Aristotle, is eudaimonia, happiness, a well lived human life. Now, as Aristotle is defending that framework, he pauses a number of times and he's again and again saying, well, we need to get clearer about this. Let me explore it from yet another angle. And when he pauses and makes those kinds of remarks, he at times makes kind of explicit methodological commitments which are extraordinarily famous. For example, that ethics requires experience. That is a view that you can discuss in ethics, whether or not you are otherwise an Aristotelian. You can just sort of ask yourself, well, if I want to engage in ethical inquiry, does that presuppose that I have some experience in human life? And is that maybe a way in which ethics differs from something like metaphysics or mathematics? Instead of talking about those explicit methodological commitments, which I want to encourage you to kind of really read really carefully and reflect on, I want to flag another dimension of Aristotle's method in Book 1, and that is the way in which he engages with the views of others. In Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle does not, as it were, explicitly tell us, when you do ethics, you need to ask yourself, what did others say about the questions that interest me? But he does make those kinds of methodological remarks in other places. He talks about this in Book 7 of the Nicomachean Ethics, at the topics, and in other places across his treatises, and we will talk more about it later on in the semester. So it is widely acknowledged, but also widely debated and contested, that a certain kind of method called the Endoxic method is really important for Aristotle's way of doing philosophy. Now, what does that mean? Endoxic, that derives from the Greek endoxa and literally translated. Endoxa are reputable opinions. They are opinions that have a high reputation. Now, why might an opinion have a high reputation such that it is worthwhile for us to think it through when we do philosophy? For Aristotle, there are 2 or 3 reasons. And I would like to suggest that those reasons continue to be relevant to us today when we do philosophy. When we embark on an inquiry in ethics, we ask some question. We typically ask ourselves, are there other philosophers who have held interesting positions on this question? But we also ask ourselves, are there ordinary, everyday intuitions here that maybe I should capture when I want my theory to be plausible? Or are there assumptions that are somehow implicit in how a lot of people lead their lives? And maybe I need to reflect on those intuitions, even if people do not explicitly defend them by way of theorizing. So, those are quite different reasons to engage with a view on a question, either that someone has defended it as a philosopher, or that it seems to you that somehow those are views that are somehow implicit in how people lead their lives. And in the topics, Aristotle says that endoxa can be views that are held by all, or by many, or by reputable people. And, who is a reputable person? For example, Socrates or Plato. So those would be, from Aristotle's point of view, thinkers who we have reason to take seriously, even though we often may not agree with them. There's sort of something interesting about their positions, and hence it is worth our time to think them through. Now, in Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle quite explicitly refers to the view that is often ascribed to Plato, that the good is the form of the good. Aristotle does not agree with this view, as it were, not at all. But he devotes chapter 6 of Book 1 to reflections on that view. In a way, just because he takes those seriously who defend this view. He does not mention Plato by name. He speaks of some friends of ours who hold this view. You can sort of think of friends in the academy, in Plato's academy. But the point is, Aristotle does not agree, and he quite fundamentally does not agree. Nevertheless, he thinks that it is going to be somehow worthwhile for his own theorizing to ask himself why he doesn't agree. Another view that comes up in Book 1 and that comes up even more prominently in later books of the Nicomachean Ethics is that pleasure is the good. Now, there are, of course, also hedonist philosophers who defend this view as a bit of theory. But Aristotle also ascribes the view that pleasure is the good to many people. And of course, it's not the case that many people write hedonist treatises. Rather, the assumption is that many people lead their lives, Aristotle thinks, in ways that betray that in their eyes, pleasure is the good. And because many people lead their lives in that way, we need to take it seriously. So that is a kind of radically different reason for taking a view seriously. Not that some, illustrious person like Plato defends it, but that it looks to us that a lot of people, even if only implicitly, hold it. And I would like to invite you to embark on your reading of the Nicomachean Ethics with the question in mind of what are the views that Aristotle discusses, rejects, engages with, maybe partially accepts and partially rejects. And why does he engage with them? And what is the range of reasons for working through someone else's view or some other view as we develop our own views in ethics?